for joining us today in our core event, Vietnam Real Estate After the Pandemic. We're so excited to finally see you today. Well, let me first introduce one of our PropTech Vietnam management team member, Nguyen. He will first introduce to us what PropTech is, our mission, and then we'll move forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Nuri, and welcome everyone. I am super excited that you guys can make it tonight. And just a quick introduction about me. My name is Lance, and I'm originally from Los Angeles. Professionally, I manage a global investment fund for high net worth individuals and family offices. So after moving back to Vietnam, my main focus has been the real estate sector, of course, social impact, and the private aviation market as well. So just a little introduction about the PropTech Network community. The PropTech Network community here is founded upon 3 principles. The first being bridging the gaps between the established real estate players and the innovative startups in the community. The second is building an independent ecosystem where all of the resources available are provided to our shareholders, our stakeholders actually. And then thirdly is helping Vietnam's real estate sector in this digital transformation age. So we're committed to providing all of our stakeholders with the necessary resources available to develop this vibrant community. And of course, we thank you so much for your time here as well. And our board of directors, I want to take this time out to thank our board of directors as well. Mr. Cosmo James, who is the chief representative of Sonkim Land, Ms. Nguyen, who is the managing partner of TN Legal, and of course, Mr. Nguyen, who is the CEO of Empire City. And they've consistently supported us on this goal and this quest that we're in. So PropTech Network overall focuses on a lot of our meetings on themes. So the first one being PropTech 3.0, which is the future of real estate. The second theme that we hosted was real estate and fintech, which in partnership with the Hong Kong Business Association here in Vietnam. And then prior to this whole COVID situation, back in December, we hosted the Co-Everything movement, which centers around the sharing economy of Vietnam. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome back Ms. Marie to the stage to introduce our guest panelists and kick off this 4th event.
All right, as we're slowly emerging from the pandemic, Vietnam real estate is also shifting in a lot So overall, the demand for office and retail space was disrupted, and the segment is slowly recovering. The retail market is experiencing a lot of challenge as rental is dropping and some landlord has to sell off their properties. However, this may present opportunities in the resale market. We have seen a huge growth lately in the co-working space and the short rental area. However, these segments are hugely impacted, and so is the hospitality sectors. However, on the other hand, we're seeing that residential properties, we have not yet seen a significant price decrease, so that's good news. And so in recent years, we have starting to see a wave of technology innovations in real estate markets. We see a growing demand for data analytics, especially in the area of properties, transaction, development, as well as valuations. So what does this mean? This really means simplifying, but also the opportunities to digitalize the home financing experience, as well as offering customers more home financing options. On the other hand, due to the nature of the markets, what we're seeing is that there is still a lot of legal as well as financing issues, especially for home ownership. On the other hand, we also see a lot of poor data reliability, which altogether will hinder the growth of PropTech, especially in Vietnam. So this is why today we'll sit down with our panelists to really look at the emerging trend across the commercial, residential, and hospitality sectors. We will also look into the opportunities and the challenge in the adoption of PropTech solution in Vietnam. So today, I am really excited to present our panelist today, Mr. Alex Green, the Managing Director of Cushman Wakefield Vietnam, with a long-term strategic capacity inside both office and industrial portfolio. He advises a range of clients from developer, international investors, and international corporations. Next is Ms. B, the Managing Director in Investment and Corporate Service at Phillip An. Previously, she worked for Central Trading Development Group, where she covered corporate financing for Phum Development Center. And lastly, Phillip An, from Harvard, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street to creating solutions to home ownership in Vietnam. Phillip is the co-founder of Homebase, a home financing solution platform. The panel discussion will then be followed by a Q&A session where we'll be happy to take your questions. I will now hand over to Ruby, who will be our panel moderator tonight. Ruby is currently a director of PropTech platform at Nguyen Group, a new digital ecosystem jointly invested by V Group and other conglomerates in Vietnam. Before co-founding PropTech Network, Ruby worked in Amazon and Facebook, as well as having an MBA at the University of Chicago. All right.
Okay, so thank you, Mary, for introducing us, and thank you all the guests today for joining us for tonight. We really welcome you, and the PropTech Network is super happy to have our fourth event after the COVID pandemic. So I think we have had a long stay at home, and everyone is deciding to go back to work. But I guess everyone is curious about what's the impact of COVID on the real estate industry in Vietnam and everything else related to property investment, PropTech, and a whole ecosystem. So today we have we have three distinguished guests. We have one, expert in consulting business, who has been consulting for multiple clients, international and locally. And then we also have a property developer, Ms. Lee from Sonkim Land, and we have a young lad here, so a PropTech entrepreneur. So I think we have a really diversified list of guests. And today I'm going to focus on the impact of COVID on real estate, as well as the future, what is in store for us. So maybe I'll start first with Mr. Alex Green. Sure. What have you heard about, just in terms of the comments and feedback from your clients during this time? What do you think is the impact of COVID on the real estate industry in Vietnam?
Sure, thank you. I guess we're kind of unique in that we work with such a wide variety of clients, so traditional developers and investors, but we also, and I think what was more telling to me was understanding what the occupiers are doing. Now, Cushman, we work on a very corporate level. So the first things we were looking at, the most impacted initially were probably the office industrial markets and the retail markets, of course, but that I'll touch on probably with the developer and the investor side. We saw obviously a very specific industry split in terms of their reaction to what the pandemic brought. Coming out of the sort of lockdown, of course we're going in, deals are sort of being put on hold. What was interesting is a low proportion were cancelled. So if you're looking at normal strategy to get a new warehouse, factory, new office, new headquarters, whatever that might be, most of them are still alive today. So we didn't actually get much drop off through the pandemic. Those deals that were closed, and this is week one after lockdown, we signed I think 10 deals in Ho Chi Minh City on pretty large corporate deals. So one was a new headquarters for a very famous retailer. They do furniture. Most of it's flat pack. So there's a brand new headquarters for this sort of industry. That was a bold decision to make week one after lockdown, but they're making that bet on the recovery of Vietnam. So I think that was a very interesting telling case for us. The others also that were first out the blocks and coming back were around the logistics space. So I think something we saw and what they learned through lockdown was that supply chain, logistics, being able to buy a home was a very, very important factor. So on the occupier side, we saw certain industries that actually didn't stop. Manufacturing, we saw sourcing, retail, FMCG, so anything linked to consumer, were very bold on coming back to Vietnam or progressing with their deals in Vietnam.
Right.
So from a developer investor standpoint, kind of different. So we're still seeing the lag, obviously, on hospitality, and I think it was a global thing. We're not alone here in Vietnam. It's just a case of when. So we're just seeing a hesitancy on when this might turn around. I think actually what will happen is Vietnam will come out of this very well. as a destination. If you've been on lockdown for 100 days, like my colleague I was talking to in Indonesia, first place he's coming is probably Phu Quoc, just to break out of his home. So that will come back, it's just a matter of time. The next one, I think, is from an investor to construction standpoint and developer standpoint is retail. And that's probably the biggest disruptive sector, I think, in impact, but also future change coming up.
Right. So I know you just mentioned a few sectors. Do you think COVID-19 will only be a short-term flip, or is gonna, cause a long-term impact from now on?
Yeah, again, so from occupier standpoint, I think short-term impacts, and I think the growth and development of Vietnam will continue. What the government has done is actually pushed in a lot of confidence into Vietnam. So another conversation today with a colleague in Berlin, right? So he actually lives in Frankfurt, lives in Berlin, as a big financial hub in Europe. He said, I've never heard Vietnam spoken about as much as I am right now.
Okay.
And I think that's just on the performance versus pandemic. So that pandemic preparedness in the future, we're going to score really well on, because it's absolutely going to be relevant.
Okay.
So again, I think it depends on who you want to talk to, but there's certainly positives. The hangover and the part we won't understand, because of the good performance in Vietnam, our day-to-day lives haven't really changed post-pandemic. So you can go to the shopping mall, you can go to the gym. In the US, I think they're going to deal with that differently, because the turnaround and the recovery has been so slow, badly controlled. People are going to be nervous. So there'll be a different future for design, management of some certain sectors, I think, that we won't know and understand until the West really understands what they're dealing with, and they don't yet.
Right. I'll turn my next question to Ms. V. In Vietnam, home ownership is always on top of their mind, and people have to own a home anyway. So I want to understand how COVID has impacted the residential market. And as a property developer, can you share your insights on, whether it's a short-term thing or it's a long-term thing?
Thank you, Lily. COVID-19 actually affected everyone, every house, every business. So for residential housing in Vietnam, we believe it's also impacted, but it's quite selective. For those that you develop with land and strategic location, low rise, and then it's going to be benefited from this COVID. For those at high rise, with the land not very prime location, it will be going to be affected a lot, and especially for those locations that with a lot of supply, and then it will be impacted a lot. For those high rise that you choose as good location, good quality, and then of course good location, good quality, cannot be too much supply, and then it's going to be a win in this situation. So and in terms of buyer behavior, I think there's a shift towards the landed housing. I've seen some more interest in landed housing from everyone, from variety around myself, from my friends, and from partners, and that also will benefit a lot from this COVID. That's also result in a shift of developer in terms of changing the way they build the product. Maybe once the developer, they have a low rise and high rise, maybe they change the low rise. And if they are more agile to that, adapt to that change, I think they're going to be the winner in this market. And of course, for high rise, if you choose a good location, there's still a lot of value there, and people still want to buy it. So that from that's about the Ho Chi Minh City. But if you look at Hanoi market, I'm not very more strong in doing analysis of Hanoi market, but I heard that the supply there quite a lot, so I can't tell for Hanoi market, but that's what I'm saying is for Ho Chi Minh City. So Hanoi maybe cannot comment. Ho Chi Minh City is something that I can see that happening as overall in residential market. Rental market also impacted. That's why also it impacts the residential housing market as well. And considering the short-term and long-term impact, I've seen overall is short-term. In the long run, Vietnam residential market is still for me, it's 10 years by. especially with good location, good quality, and then no one can compete with yourself. It's just that's also the strategy that we continue to do for the last 6 years, and it says that it showed the success.
So this is just out of curiosity, but for the benefit of the guests here, do you think now is a good time to buy residential properties?
It depends. So as I say, buying property also, if you choose a good, again, location. Everyone knows property is about location, right? Good location, the area where a lot of infrastructure is invested, the product with high quality, the place where you don't have too much suppliers, and then just buy it.
Okay. So COVID-19 will not stop people from buying homes.
That again depends, right?
Okay.
Depends on what you buy, what you're looking for. So something with land, you can buy land, you can buy rented housing, you can buy condos with good location, high qualities,
Right.
And then the value is continue to rise.
Okay, got it. Okay, I'll come to my last guest. So I know everyone knows about Sonkim Land and Cushman Wakefield, but I think a lot of people might not have heard of Homebase. So Phillip, can you please introduce yourself and your startup Homebase, and why you moved to Vietnam?
Sure, yeah. So I think just to add on to the answer that Ms. V gave to that last question, it's a great time to buy, especially if you're using Homebase, right? And now I'll explain what Homebase is. So fundamentally, Homebase is founded on this premise that real estate financing here in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia is actually quite broken. I think everyone knows that there's actually a very high demand for buying property, but what people don't know is that if you look at the average income to household ratio here, it's actually twice as high as somewhere like the US or even in London, right? So unaffordability is a real problem. And on the flip side, if you go to a traditional sort of financial institution like a bank, you get interest rates like 15%, which from the US or from Singapore, from Korea, Japan is just utterly ridiculous because you're comparing 3% to 15% every single year. So this is a huge market, I think, especially in Vietnam. Vietnam is a really young country, it's very fast growing. And huge market, right? And that's exactly where we, Homebase, as a financing solution, we come in. So how we fundamentally work is, you as a home buyer, you can actually pay whatever portion you can afford, whether it be 30%, 40%, and we buy the rest of the property for you. And then we structure a financing plan such that over time you can buy back more equity at your own convenience. And you get to control what this looks like. And in the meantime, all you're doing is just paying us a small portion of rent. And as you buy more of the property, the rent that you pay decreases, right? And basically over time, you just buy out more, or you just buy out completely, or if you want to sell it, we just split the proceeds pro rata. So, our solution is a little bit different than your average, traditional financial institution, which is a bank, because, we structure this payment plan according to your own comfort level. So even if you're a millennial, maybe you're young, you're high earning, but you don't have a lot of saved up, right? You can actually buy real estate. You can actually earn equity. You can actually have skin in the game and start making money. And then fundamentally, right, for us, we're actually a co-investor with you. So, we actually care fundamentally about the asset that we co-invest in, and, we're on your side. So that's a little bit about the business, and, happy to chat more about it. In terms of my own personal background, a little bit weird. So I was born in Asia, but then our family moved to South Africa, and then to the US, and then I moved to Singapore, and now to Vietnam as well. And then professionally, I've done everything from banking to consulting to tech to even venture capital investing in startups. But I think out of everything I've done in terms of both geographical and also professionally, everything I've seen so far, being here in Vietnam actually excites me the most. Not only just because, hey, there's great opportunity here, everyone here is actually meeting in person instead of in the US where all my friends are depressed on Zoom calls already. But also, it's a really young population. Technology is just coming here, right? And GDP growth, there's a lot of macroeconomic factors that actually support the growth of this country. So I think the fact that we're here, the fact that we're in an industry like real estate, which there's still a ton of opportunity to really fundamentally disrupt, makes me very, very excited to be here and to be able to start a business that is at the intersection of technology, of financing, and of real estate.
Cool. What an interesting concept. So you actually do co-investing with the home buyer.
Exactly.
So you're a globetrotter. Okay. So I know that.
I have a
Okay,
so
please.
sorry, I need to add 2 more points because I remember the crisis 2007, isn't it?
2008, yeah.
So one of the reasons is because because of the mortgage. You know, banks just give you the money even if you don't have the. I mean, in the U.S., you don't have ability to pay. You don't have a stable job. You just pay down like 10% or 5%, and then when things happen, crisis happen, and people you become foreclosure a lot. But if you look at Vietnam situation, actually people apply for the loan. For example, our project and for the project I worked in my previous company, it is not a lot. It's not high. So a crisis in the residential market is not something going to happen here. So that's a different. The other difference, if you look at interest rate at the moment, and the interest rate 7 years ago, it's totally different. So macro actually very good for residential market in Vietnam in the long run. And the third factor is Vietnam is different from other countries. A lot of infrastructure, we are emerging country, right? A lot of infrastructure will have been put into place by the government, and it's coming more. So there must be an uptrend in terms of residential price. Yeah, anything happens just short term, I believe so.
Right.
Can I tie something through?
Yes,
I think you
please.
make a really good point, and I think it can tie back to what Philip does. And talking about that crisis, we learned an awful lot about the crisis, right? And there was a lot of reform. And some of that is being impacted in Vietnam now, right? So we've got a lot of restrictions around lending into real estate specifically. So I think the education around real estate lending needs to change, and I think you're part of that story. But I also think that could just breed this sort of new wave of funding, because we're having to look at alternative sources across any asset type and any scale because of the restrictions on the local banks. So I think if we have more alternatives in the market, and this is at a smaller individual level, but as this grows, I mean, if I don't have to take a mortgage on my apartment when I'm 23 years old in Vietnam, and I have that capital to redeploy somewhere else, then we're starting it and you're developing a great story, but we're doing it on the lines of some very serious lessons learned, right, in 2008. And I think that reform and that structure we have in place, and the education around that, and then the offering that you've got, is a really good story, and I think there's no better place to implement that than Vietnam, right?
We're going to use this as a customer testimonial later on the website. Just FYI.
See, if you want to apply for a loan in Vietnam, not easy.
Right.
You have to pay down 30%.
Right.
Some more crazy, you have to pay down 20%. When in the US, you can take to some cases you pay 10%, 50%. So a totally different situation compared to other developed countries. So we still conservative in terms of lending. So it helped the situation a lot.
Right. But no matter what, I still think that there were a lot of challenges for Vietnamese companies, especially during the lockdown. So can you share, how your companies have overcome those challenges, or maybe capture the opportunities, post lockdown during the time? Anyone wants to start first?
I can start because I have a mic. So I think we saw two main things. Number one, obviously, is that during the lockdown there was a slowdown in real estate buying behavior, and it makes sense because people really can't go outside to buy real estate. But what we actually really saw that was quite interesting was that even though everyone was at home, we actually still got a lot of inbound demand, right? And this inbound demand, after we talked to a lot of these consumers, after we talked to a lot of these customers on why they want to use our product in this tough time, is actually we found that a lot of had traditional mortgages. They had these traditional financing solutions that actually fix them onto a fixed payment schedule. And what we see when we talk to a lot of these consumers is that in Vietnam, because interest rates are so high and mortgage terms are actually quite compressed, 10, 15 years as opposed to your 20, 30 years in the US or more developed markets, is that the monthly obligations that you have to pay a lot of these banks are actually quite high. So what that means is that when people are affected, right, when their monthly household income is affected, they actually start, having trouble being able to pay them back, and they need a more flexible solution for financing. So one of the trends that we saw was actually a, sort of an uptick in interest in this idea of co-investing, where hey, we're in it, we have aligned incentives, right, and we're in it together. And if this property goes up, we go up. If it goes down, then we sort of share the loss together. I think the second thing that we're beginning to see, especially after now lockdown has ended and we have events, is that actually there's a lot more international interest in terms of Vietnam, right? And this actually comes at a really good time because geopolitically and macroeconomically, there's the U.S.-China trade war. There's some stuff that's going on in Hong Kong right now. So there's actually an outflow of capital, especially from these kind of more traditional investors in Hong Kong, in China, even in Korea and Japan, right? Trying to deploy capital into any market in the world, right? And out of, I would say, all the markets in Southeast Asia and even the world, I think Vietnam, and especially residential real estate with all the macroeconomic trends going on, remains one of the sort of top prospects. So we feel a lot of sort of questions or even inquiries from overseas VietQs or even investors from a lot of these countries on, hey, how do I get started investing in Vietnam? Like, what do you guys think about the prospects here? How do I deploy capital? Like, how do I work with you guys as well? Yeah.
Cool. Me, you want to follow on that residential topic?
So adding to the Philip's answer, correct. Like we for our projects and some other foreign, high quality projects from other developers, we receive quite strong interest from foreign buyers. So Vietnam still very interesting story for people to put money into real estate market. As long as you build to the quality that people want, as always. So I think that's the opportunity to catch those interests. Of course, it's impacted because of COVID. People, don't have time to look at something and to take care of their family issue, things like that. But in the long run, it's still a lot of interest from foreign buyers. One of the things that we build into it to facilitate the foreign buyer interest is thinking about a way how to finance the foreign buyers, and where Homebase can be one of our partners as well. Because foreigner like him make a lot of money, but how can he get a loan, right? Not easy. So structure in a way that people can get a loan. They want to buy a product, they can pay the money to the bank, to us, and where the bank cannot lend to them. So this guy can help, and where the product actually becomes
You have a perfect ecosystem, right?
Yeah, not to market ourselves, but actually one story, because we receive a lot of interest from the foreign buyer. They want to borrow, but regulation in Vietnam do not allow them to do so. So think of a way to facilitate that. So
what about the local buyers? Do you have any strategies to entice more local buyers?
Of course, local buyers still always the key drivers of our projects, and it's just for example, we have one project which is very high end, where the foreign buyer they can see in the next 5-10 years the price going up a lot, like 5-10 times multiple if they apply the same story in their country. Riverfront properties, very prime location, just buy. But where local people, some people they still perceive that, but some haven't to that level yet. But once people perceive that, they just come and buy and see it waiting for 5-10 years, and they buy back on their cash a lot. So the ability to go with us in the long run is there.
Right. I think it's very interesting because the residential market in Vietnam is actually a supply constrained market. So if anyone holds the supply, you hold the power. Okay. Now back to Alex. So what have you seen your clients? How did they respond to the COVID? The lockdown and everything. How did they overcome this? Maybe short-term challenges.
Sure. I think it sort of ties into your previous question as well. Just going back to that, how did you deal with it as a corporate? So I think there's 3 levels to this. Firstly, every company, I think, and the industry, thankfully, sort of boiled it down to what it was, and it's people, right? So regardless of what a building is, it's related to people. So pandemic happens, first thing you do is you look after your staff. So you're taking measures around this. Now what that means is that you're then working from home. So I wonder if you guys are now going to start designing your apartments to include a bigger home office. And I mentioned the furniture company earlier, right? So yeah, I imagine they're going to sell quite a lot of desks, because people are going to start getting ready for their home offices, right? So, so there's part of that, and then there's the control back into work. And I think companies have suddenly taken the moral decision to say, okay, people are first, and that ties through every kind of sector that we're working through. During that period, we also learned a lot about our clients. So, you know, Ben, who's in the room with me today, is making 50 phone calls a day, 50 Zoom calls a day, just keeping people up to date. And we're learning an incredible amount. We're often saying, you know, we don't know what tomorrow might look like, but we're learning throughout that process. And as I said, I think what we saw was just certain industries, certain clients performing better and being ready earlier. The guys that got ahead of the issue were much faster back into market. Fortunately, our company was the same. So we came back, we had tons going on, all our staff are there, they all came back to the office and everyone's happy and we're all fine. But it was that preparedness and that management through process. So we saw certain industries did that better than others, certain sectors have performed better throughout that process as well.
Right.
And I think it's just having that relationship closely with clients that became really important, enabled us to position ourselves on whatever it might be that's next. We didn't really know.
Right.
And so, you know, it was just to boil down to basics and human and keeping those millions of Zoom calls just relevant because, you know, the markets, the sectors are changing day by day. We're still trying to unravel a lot of this if we're looking at valuations. The data we had Q1 is irrelevant. So we're, you know, in many ways we're kind of relearning and starting a lot of this from scratch as well. So getting close to that was a really interesting process from, you know, an employer, but also working across these industry sectors to see how we're all preparing, getting back to business as usual.
Right.
And we're seeing the hangover in the rest of the world. So, you know, we're really kind of, in many cases now, we're being looked at as a test case
Right.
for our company to see, you know, what does that recovery look like? What measures have Vietnam gone through to get us right?
Right. You know, Alex, what you just mentioned is just exactly like this saying, right? Within every crisis, there's an opportunity. So I'm sure, you know, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Vietnam post-COVID. So which sectors do you think will have the brightest spot, and how can Vietnam best position itself to capture these opportunities?
Yeah, Vietnam has done the first thing right. They controlled the pandemic. So investor confidence in Vietnam now is, I think, at an all-time high. Just in terms of that pandemic control, the economic robustness has followed that. And then, of course, you've got local market growth and everything else that comes with it, the free trade agreements that Vietnam have been so progressive on, right? So all of those levels have put us in a great position to compete. Then if you're looking at property types and sector groups and asset types, I don't think much has changed, but it's highlighted what we knew before, and it's accelerated trends. So we knew logistics and industrial was great for Vietnam. Now that's just become so more apparent, right? So you look at China +1, we had the trade war, now we've got this pandemic recovery, and then supply chains looking to diversify out of China. I think we're going to be more competitive with, you know, South America, for example, when that turns around for that US connection, certain parts of Africa, but that absolutely is accelerating a trend. Yeah, so, but that was nothing new. You know, that was busy before pandemic, it's now much faster. Retail was kind of sick when you got into this, right? So to use that analogy in the pandemic, you're going in a little unhealthy, you're coming out probably less healthy, right? So I think retail was kind of going into that phase already with the advent and reliance of online, how malls have changed. What's going to be really interesting to see what happens next, I think, is if you look at the US and what will happen here could be really different in terms of trends if you look at how retail is going to work. If I'm in New York and I'm coming out of the pandemic, I'm going to be a little bit nervous about walking down High Street, right? Uncontrolled environment, retailers are all independent. I might like the sound of going to a mall where it's controlled, density is controlled, cleanliness is controlled. In Vietnam, I'm not sure that would be the case. Because, you know, these are crowded, often they're not that well run. And I think, yeah, you've got this density issue around some of these assets. So I think that trend is one to watch in Vietnam too. There might be parts of the market that are going to struggle faster than they were before. Hospitality is probably the one, there's an opportunity there if you're looking at probably debt equity play, as opposed to coming in as operator right now. There's distress there, there has to be. And I think that's just a timing call. But the rebound will come, we know this. The visitor levels, the interest in Vietnam absolutely is going to bounce back.
Right.
So on those pure levels, the one that's kind of the most boring probably is the office market. I think it's just, we're going back to normal. And the industry, I think the discussion around that post-pandemic, what's the change and opportunity? I think Cushman, we did a survey of around 50,000 people recently about, you know, the changes in how people work. Are they going to be comfortable going back to the office? I think what we've learned that the rest of the world hasn't seen yet is that we absolutely wanted to be back in the office. Right? We did not want to sit at home any longer. There's going to be, you know, big corporate changes in how they look at their real estate globally. There might be some downsizing, but throughout the research we've done on the back of that survey, we can see companies, massive global corporations, maybe reducing their global footprints of 10, possibly 20%. Not significant, but certainly not significant in a market like ours. So we see robustness there and just a nice stabilized market going forward.
Right. Interesting. And I'm sure you share the same views.
Yeah, adding more to that.
Yeah.
Post-COVID, if you recently people hear a lot about news about the manufacturing coming from China to Vietnam, and Vietnam, as per BWC report recently, it's become in emerging market. It become number 3 top investment destination country. So as long as the FDI going to any country for manufacturing, it benefit a lot in all aspects of the real estate, and especially people come here to work, right? They need a house to live, so they need to rent a house. So residential for living or for leasing out is also good potential. People come here, they need a place to work, right? So you need an office space more. People come here, they need a manufacturing so they can manufacture the products. So of course, industrial real estate is also a hot trend right now. And they come here, they want to entertain, they work, live, and need to entertain. So of course, retail is suffering, hotel is suffering, but in the long run, I believe it's still, it's going to bounce back.
I see.
So
So all of you are
one
pretty
thing on the
upbeat about it long
one on the
term.
retail, just to watch. There was some news that came out yesterday in the UK. It's not from the UK. So quarterly payments were due 2 days ago in the UK. Quarter day is 24 June. 14% of retailers paid the rent. 14 billion in the quarter, out of a market size of $3-4 billion.
Yeah, it's suffering.
14%. So that's something. I think if you look at the trends that are happening there, that industry has to change.
Right.
Has to change.
Okay. Now let's talk about PropTech, right? Because I'm sure that post-COVID there'll be a lot of opportunities. So let's hear about this PropTech entrepreneur. I think PropTech is a global trend, and Vietnam is also embracing this trend. So how do you think this pandemic will impact the growth of PropTech?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you just look at PropTech as a whole, I actually think that Vietnam is one of those places that is actually quite new, right? The environment here is actually not quite developed, even compared to more what you think of emerging markets like Latin America or South America. I think historically what you've seen for PropTech is that it's very traditional, right? So you have your PropTech 1.0 models, which are your traditional sort of real estate listing platforms, right? I want to buy a house, I want to find an apartment, I go on this website, and I find a place. And over the past several years, we've now moved on to sort of the second part of that generation, which is, hey, I now want to work with a broker, right? And I want to work with an agent, right? And now I have these tech-enabled brokerages, and these agents can have technology to show around these properties. And we've also seen this trend of co-working, co-living, which obviously will be quite significantly affected by COVID. But I think going in the future, right, this is where this sort of PropTech 3.0 model really comes to fruition, right? Because there's a lot of optimism in the market, right? Everyone wants a piece of real estate. Everyone wants a piece of Vietnam's growth heading into the future. And even if you just benchmark what the current models are in Vietnam versus, let's say, in the US or even in South America, actually the optionality here is actually quite lacking. So in the US, you have things like Cadre, which is basically commercial real estate, right? And you just put in 50K and you diversify your portfolio across all these commercial assets. Here, there's basically no way to do so, right? In the US, you have something like Open Door, right? Which is an iBuyer model, which provides instant liquidity for anyone who wants to sell their property, right? Here, there's nothing like that. You have stuff like Divvy Homes and Zero Down, which is basically what Homebase is trying to do, which is helping and combining capital with real estate and helping people actually get into properties through equity co-investing. Here, still very, very immature, right? So I think going to the future, as people become more bullish and optimistic about the market and find ways to actually, have equity positions in the fundamental underlying assets, right? Which is like residential or even commercial real estate. These models have to develop and these models have to evolve. And I think it's actually quite a good time right now if you're considering, entering into PropTech or considering investing in PropTech or using a PropTech solution to finance a home like Homebase. It's a great time for doing that. Yeah.
So I want to pass this to Ms. V and hear from the real property developer. So I hear a lot of pain points for Vietnamese people when it comes to buying or selling a home. So how do you think PropTech can streamline, all the inefficiencies in that process?
The answer is definitely yes. For technology can help a lot, streamline a lot of things, to make it more, convenient, comfortable. One more important key is also a hub to collect the data and analyze the data. So for anyone that want to have a right, efficient decision in developing the right product, the right price for buyers, and the right taste of your buyer want. And if you focus on technology, building that a hub where they can collect the data and do analysis like those information, and then you can have a good model in terms of development, more efficient. And on the other hand, of course, engaging properties property management software and streamline the process of from the beginning, from you bring customer to see your projects, and then convince them to buy your projects, and then helping them to make payments, signing documentation, making it more transparent, and then until you deliver houses and then they come to live and then rent it out. All the entire process is customer experience, customer journey. And if you add technology into that, design a process to facilitate that, and I think it's going to be the winner in this market. So technology always help everyone to make things more efficient and more.
I'll throw the last question to Alex before I open this up to the floor. Okay. So post-COVID, which PropTech subsector do you feel most positive about, and which subsector do you not feel very positive about?
Yeah, I warned you guys when I came onto the panel that I spent about 4 hours the other day trying to figure out how to do a compound annual growth rate equation on Excel, so I'm not a tech guy. But what I like, and looking at the physical practicalities of what it will bring, and I think again going back to what's the most relevant thing for most of the world considering right now is what the technology can bring to practical applications around well-being and health. And I think that's the fundamental. So you can start at a very puerile level and base construction level and start looking at air quality. We've got certain environmental accreditations in our industry that I think are irrelevant. Yeah, if you look at, for example, I don't know how far this is being broadcast, but if you look at someone like LEED, yes, there's changes in air quality, but actually, if you look at that from a health standpoint, it doesn't meet the sort of consideration that we need. If you're looking at air quality itself, you're looking at filtration, how that's managed, then you can build that back into building management. You touched about is if you're controlling, say, public space, so if it's a mall, what does a distancing situation look like? What is a density issue when you're looking at the pure people coming through? So I think there's some very practical applications of technology to wire into the physical aspects of real estate in a much smarter way. The bit I really want someone to crack for us, and it probably would be someone like Phillip, is how are we going to really improve our own industry? I can't work Excel. I'm a good example of how kind of old-fashioned behind we are. But if we want to start looking at what Vietnam needs, I think data and the scarcity of data is one of the biggest challenges that we have as a business. Now, if we can unlock that and we can get secure data, then we can do some really fun things, particularly around valuation. We're still doing that in a really old-fashioned way of guys on motorbikes writing down the information that we're finding ourselves. There's tons to be done there. We need some legal framework and we need some transparency issues to improve in Vietnam. But I think that's an area here that I've been most excited about going forward, just to improve the efficiencies, which then it is going to improve process, it's going to reduce cost, and consumer ultimately and developer are going to win through that. So I think that's a sector I would really like to look at post-COVID in Vietnam, not COVID related, but certainly one of the areas I think that we have a really big hole that needs to be filled with something. And I don't know what it looks like, but it's going to have to be related to some underlying data-driven issue that we just don't see.
Right.
And we know it's there. It's not centrally controlled, and that needs to happen.
Right. There's someone who is very data-driven and has the capability to do data analytics, right?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So I'll end my panel session here. No, I know. Actually, it's not ending yet. Let's open this up to the floor. So I want to get the questions from the audience. So how does this work?
All right, we'll be accepting any questions.
Because we from OMG is very interested in PropTech startup in Vietnam. So we joined the Q&A as well. So you guys can feel free to ask the question for the panelists and Ruby.
Okay.
What is OMG? Like that.
Do you want a mic or?
I think they have,
Oh,
they
okay.
have a mic. We should share.
Hello. So I have a question for the startup, buying
Homebase?
together. I mean, yeah.
Buying together.
Co-investing.
Yeah, co-investing. Yeah.
Buying
So
together.
how do you cover the risk for, like, let's say the person doesn't pay the rent, or if like tomorrow there is a crash or something? How do you cover? Because I guess your business model is you are making money when the apartment is in the end sold, right? So you are taking the delta, and you are. This is how you make money. So how do you cover the risk if the person you are buying with is not paying you, and if like tomorrow, I don't know, there is a bubble and the market crash?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one are actually investors and both home buyers who work with us, they often ask us. So I think it's actually two questions. One is more about the micro risk of what happens if an individual home buyer, like let's say yourself, defaults. And then the other one is what happens if macro risk, right? 2008 happens again and the entire market crashes. What happens to our property portfolio, right? On the more micro side, we actually implement some sort of credit scoring and analytics before we actually decide to co-invest with one individual person. So if you look at our process as a whole, we have to build comfort around two main areas, both the property that we invest in, right? This is actually a very valuable asset that we think will go up in value, that doesn't have any title issues, doesn't have any legal issues. Maybe even if it has SPA, that we think that a pink book will be issued. Maybe there's a certain type of developer that we work with and a certain type of developer that we don't work, right? So there's a whole list of factors that we do our due diligence on both the customer and also on the property that we co-invest in, to make sure that we're confident that this fundamental underlying asset will sort of appreciate in value, or at least not crash or have any significant legal issues. In terms of the actual consumer, we do have some sort of provisions that we explain to the customer from day one that are quite fair. For example, if you decide to run away with all the money, we can sell the property and then we split the proceeds pro rata, right? And we deduct the portion that you decide to, sort of run away with, right? But other than that, it's sort of a fairly straightforward relationship. The analogous example that we give our customers is that you're investing with your friend, you're investing with your brother, right? And what happens if your brother runs away, right? You still own the property, so you sell it, you deduct the portion he owns, maybe you return him his money and you take the rest. On the other side is sort of the more global macro risk question, and that's definitely a very, very hard question, I think, not only for our company, but also for property developers, for probably Cushman Wakefield, everyone in the market, right? And I think the long-term answer, the really true answer, is that you honestly don't know, right, if there's a market bubble. But what you can do is you can ensure that whatever you do at a micro scale, every single property that you build up your portfolio, right, are not extremely overvalued. And then after that, you can install a lot of hedging instruments or a lot of risk instruments, right? One of the things that we've seen from our company side is actually there's a lot of Singaporean investors and Korean investors that want sort of exposure to the property market here in Vietnam, right? But instead of wanting to buy one specific property, which they had before, and putting $1 million in one property and find a tenant and then fix it up, you can actually sort of give us the money, right? And then we'll actually deploy it across multiple portfolio. So not only sort of you diversify your risk across multiple assets, you get an index fund sort of return, very similar to a REIT. Our model is quite unique because we work with home buyers, not renters, so we have something like 100% occupancy, and we have some other sort of provisions that make it quite attractive. And what you can see in the long run is that basically we're constructing a market index, like very similar to a REIT or a real estate fund, like a private equity real estate fund that has the index return, right? So basically you can install these protective provisions that pass on the risks to third-party high net worth individuals and make them happy and also make your customers happy as well. Yeah, it's a win-win for all. Yeah.
I just cut off Phillip, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, I talked too
I
much.
just get it. So actually, my next question is for myself. So I'm new to real estate. So I hope you guys don't mind about some stupid questions. Recently, so in Vietnam, there's a few companies, they offer something called fractional ownership. One apartment sell to 100 people. With 2,000 US dollar, you can own a part of apartment, right? So we have a few companies already, real estate, Finso, like 5 or 6 of them. So I just have a very open question for all the panelists. What do you guys think about this model? Is that already legal in Vietnam? How's that structured? I just feel really surprised. A few companies offer an apartment, grade B, is far away, 100K, but they sell to 100 people. You can own like by crowdfunding.
I'm skeptic on this. So I think if I have the opportunity to invest $2,000, I'm probably not going to put it into a clunky, slow-moving share on a real estate issue. I think I'd rather throw that into the stock market or into the casino, unless I really want to go super safe. But then maybe again I'd look at the bond market or the gold markets for that stability if it's that sort of asset size. I think you maybe touched on where if you're looking again maybe at a larger sort of club, maybe fewer investors, if there are platforms available to do that with maybe a reduced amount of investors, then maybe there's an angle there. But I think on the smallest level, I don't know if I'd really need to have that tangible asset for $2,000, because I don't think that the price increments, certainly in more mature markets, would be large enough to make that an interesting investment. In Vietnam, maybe, if you're looking at certain sectors, and we have seen boom growth in certain markets and in certain asset types, so it could work there. But I think as a way of getting sort of an entry investment, I'm not sure it's big enough or sexy enough for me personally.
Do you want to?
Yeah. I personally like it.
Because you can sell apartments.
No, it's not that. It's not because I can sell apartment. It's just I like to invest in the one that generate value, which is properties. Normally, it's the properties. So for people that don't have a big pocket, how can they have that exposure? So this model commercially, I think is helpful for everyone. It's just the issue, one, if you organize the model and you don't decide the mechanism who hold the voting right over the asset, once conflict is happening, then you're gonna fail. If you put that in place at the beginning, tell everybody this is the rule before you enter the game, and then you're gonna exercise the one that you set at the beginning, and then you do what you say, and then people will follow it. It's win-win for everyone. Second thing is, in Vietnam, actually the legal framework, I'm not sure it allows this or not, but commercially it helps everyone. So once you do that and you build a trust along the way, and then of course somebody needs to advocate for the regulator that comes and play, hey, please support it in doing this. It's supporting the entire society. It's also helping the society with the good funding, efficient funding for the entire society. Instead of putting to the bank, I put it into real estate. It actually generates value and also preserve the value.
I'll try to keep it short, but I think there's actually fundamentally two factors, right? That any sort of crowdfunding platform, whether it be whatever asset type, right? Whether it be financial instruments, whether it be whiskey or even paintings. In the US, there's a company called Roofstock that does this. There's also Cadre, which is commercial real estate. You have to put in 50K USD. There's one, I think, that does paintings. There's one that's Otis Wealth. You can buy a tenth of a sneaker, right? You can buy a tenth of a Ferrari, right? And whatever, these crowdfunding models, whatever the iteration is, right? There's only two factors that matter. Number one is, what's the alternative that these customers have? So if I'm a, let's say, ordinary, Vietnamese, and I just got out of school maybe 5 years, I probably don't have exposure to asset classes like stocks or even bonds or commodities trading, right? I probably don't know what options trading is, but fundamentally, I appreciate real estate. I can see that it's tangible, and I can see that a lot of people have made a lot of money from it, right? So maybe that's a fundamental asset. And then there's a completely different asset class, which is, hey, I'm a really high net worth individual and I want exposure to private equity deals in commercial real estate, right? I want to deploy $1 million, $2 million, right? And that's what exactly Cadre does. And I think in the beginning, really no one thought that that was a big enough audience. But here, maybe there is, right? Because that's actually where a lot of the opportunity does lie. So I think that's the first factor. And then I think the second factor is actually just the underlying asset as well, right? Even if you're doing a very sort of residential real estate, it really depends on the IRR of the platform to actually be able to attract more investors and to attract follow-on funds. So, you know, if your underlying real estate is maybe in, you know, Dong Nai province and, you know, really no one wants to rent it and it's appreciating 1% a year, obviously that probably isn't a very valuable asset that everyone wants to invest in, right? But if it's something that actually everyone believes in and everyone actually thinks will appreciate in value and will generate high rental yield, then yeah, for sure. I think there will actually be a lot of demand for it.
Do I need to provide comments as well?
Yes.
Okay, so I think at One Group we actually studied the model of Roofstock, you know, the startup about, I would say, fractional ownership that Phillip just mentioned. And I think that, you know, fractional ownership will eventually become trendy in Vietnam, but I'm skeptical about the timing of the moment. First of all, because I think in terms of legal framework, even with, you know, just normal physical assets, there has been a lot of legal issues in Vietnam that property home buyers and home sellers and even property developers are facing. And every legal battle is an uphill battle. So, you know, when it comes to my friends and my families, and if they personally ask my personal advice, I would advise them to not to do it. But actually from a PropTech perspective, I think that, you know, fractional ownership is innovation. And, you know, every innovation will have their own early adopters, and eventually it will boom when there is a marketplace for it. Because eventually when you invest in fractional ownership, right, it's still an investment vehicle. And you need to have a marketplace to trade those shares, to sell and buy those shares. And that marketplace can only be empowered with data analytics and a lot of interest in the market. So the guy that comes out first, like real estate, right, they will have to do a lot of market education. Because let's say if I have money to invest in a portfolio of stocks and bonds versus real estate versus fractional real estate, I have to look at the risk and returns, and I have to look at, okay, let's say one day I have to liquidate. What will help me to liquidate, right? How can I increase the liquidity in that market? And right now, we do have concerns about the liquidity. So I think until there is a mechanism for Vietnamese real estate to become more liquidate, like something like open door, then I think, you know, the timing might not be, I would say, you know, it's a bit early, but I believe that fractional ownership will eventually become trendy in Vietnam. Because it does solve a big problem in Vietnam. A lot of Vietnamese millennials cannot afford home ownership.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think we still have time for one more question.
I remember we had some questions from Facebook or something like that, right? Yeah.
We have report unit.
Okay.
Very close by.
Can I ask a follow-up question on this, or maybe a statement on that same topic? So on the same topic, look at, say, and I'm going to just play the bad guy throughout this whole thing. So look at Barcelona and look at the reaction to Airbnb and the restrictions around that, right? So there's an issue there with the effect of Airbnb on pricing in apartments for local people in Barcelona. They're worried about the tourism, right, and how that's having an impact. If you're an owner-occupier of an apartment block, you've got fractional ownership on a number of apartments in the same block. The control, governments, legal framework is one thing, but what's going to happen? Who's actually cares about that apartment? Who's that neighbor? Does it become another Airbnb issue? Do you think there has to be some sort of governance behind this, which I think is going to be really hard to implement?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's hard, but there's a way. And one of the way to capture is, for example, if you say that to mitigate those difficulty situation, then, for example, one house that 100K, right? Instead of putting into 100 shares, then you put it 10. A lot of demand out there, so less people, but still there are a lot of people want to enjoy in that apartment, value appreciation and also rental over it. And just put a mechanism of how, at what time you want to exit, the mechanism to exit, and mechanism to manage the property along the way, and maybe hire a third party like you to manage the property. So I think that's of course that to continue, and always there's a way. I just think it's more positive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in that specific example, even if you look at, there's a company in Australia called BrickX, which is fractional ownership for real estate. Actually, the direction they're moving towards is actually, instead of just owning shares, we're actually going to do property management and help people actually own the homes, right? And the fundamental underlying reason is because they want yield, right? They want more money, essentially, right? And if you just have houses lying empty, no one's taking care of it, you're missing out on an opportunity, right? So I think, there's definitely, hopefully, right? Hopefully we're at a stage where, as we provide more value add for consumers, both on the investing front, but also from a living front, these things align towards the same goal, right? Of actually being able to generate more yield for both investors and also provide these opportunities for people to actually live in the homes. And hopefully it's a model that aligns well with the needs of everyone involved.
Yeah. No, I think just like how Airbnb is like they are the game creator, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be the game creator, and then you distribute the rights of the game to other people, and then you manage the game and you set the rules. So people that invest in this cannot set the rules. You are the one that set the rules. Sure. I think it's the same thing for fractional ownership. The one that coordinate this deal, and I see this with a lot of crowdfunding platforms for commercial real estate, because if I can own like 1/10 of a commercial building in New York, I would actually try to invest in it. But I don't know about fractional ownership or residential in Vietnam. Okay, so I do see that the one that set up that mechanism, they have the responsibility to do due diligence, and then come up with the IRR and then the risk and reward scheme, and they manage everything. So you come in as an investor and you have very I would say smooth, and I would say I would call it risk-free, but like just one-stop process, right? So if you can make it a one-stop thing, then everyone will be comfortable with investing in fractional real estate, just the way that they do invest in stocks and bonds. But I think that they will, eventually come, but maybe not the moment, right? Because I think first of all, again, I do have concerns about the legal framework in Vietnam. Everything that accounts with innovation has to come within a sandbox. We have the sandbox mechanism in Singapore, and we do have a sandbox mechanism in Vietnam. And I think the government do place a lot of restrictions on everything that involves financial re-engineering, right? So we do see that in fintech, and I think that for real estate financing, it does have capital inflows and outflows. So I'm sure that there'll be government restrictions, but we just haven't seen it yet because the model hasn't boomed in Vietnam yet. So I don't know. Okay, I think do we have any other questions? Okay, so why don't you guys over there?
All right, I want to say a big thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.